you a general idea of when and what we will be doing in our future upcoming outreach. So you can see there's a little check right there next to round 1 for our community and stakeholder work group meetings. We let all the community and stakeholder representatives know that we're going to be asking them to come back a couple of times, and we went through the agendas with them for those future meetings. We also asked them to provide us with any names for additional people to add to those, as well as different ways for us to reach them. So for round 2, which we're anticipating being in November, we're planning on bringing back, basically we're going to be looking at maps, and there's going to be alignments, and there's going to be technologies associated with different alignments so that we can discuss those and get thoughts. We're anticipating that in the next RTD meeting that we will be presenting that information to you all, which will be in October. So our plan is always to present to our steering committee or to you all information for comment and discussion so that we can adjust as needed, since you are our steering committee, prior to going out to our stakeholder and community work groups to get their perspectives. Once we do that, we'll also then go out to the public and we'll present information to them, usually in kind of a what would you call it? Kind of I don't know how to call it, like a workshop almost, a walkthrough workshop where we have different boards set up, different stations, and people manning those stations so the person can walk through from the beginning all the way through to the end and can have really one-on-one discussions and get a lot of their questions answered. We also get a survey done from them as they're walking through on those different ideas so that we can gain a lot of the same information just in a different format than how we do it with our more focused work group sessions. So we plan on doing that also in the November timeframe. And then for our round 3 of community and stakeholder work group meetings, we will be hopefully at the point where we'll be presenting them. We'll take the thoughts that we got from round 2 from the community, the stakeholder work groups, also from the public open house meetings, and from any thoughts that you guys have given us at the RTD meetings, and we will develop what we think are some technical, including your thoughts, 1 to 2 or 3 locally preferred alternatives for each one of the corridors. So as we all know, for this study, that's the goal, is to have a locally preferred alternative for each corridor at the end of the study. So the way we get to that is we then take what the technical solutions we come up with based on what you all have told us at that point, and we bring it back to the community stakeholder work groups as well as yourself and the public, and we talk to them about those technical solutions, get everyone's input. We then present to you all everyone's input, and you have the final say on those on the actual one locally preferred alternative that would move forward. So that's kind of the big picture of how the outreach fits in with the project itself. And of course, we'll be doing newsletters. We have a website. All that good information's out there as well. Is there any questions on any of that? No? All right. Well, I will then.
I do have one question. I know in our group, just the one that I was in, there seemed to be a understanding, not a push, but an understanding that they seem to be thinking commuter rail rather than rubber tire technology.
Right.
Did you pick up any kind of a sense of where the public in particular, public and stakeholders are thinking more than one over another?
You know, it's interesting. We made a presentation on mode on purpose because we wanted to make sure and set the framework that we can't go in this with predisposed ideas, because we really do have to fit the best technology for the best corridor, at least in the near term. However, we did hear rumblings like that, like you said. At the North Corridor meetings, we did hear kind of commuter rail being thrown around. some of the other ones, we did hear people talking about the BRT or express bus, like I was mentioning in Norman. They did say, you know, we can really see, it'd be great to have, not get stuck in congestion on our Sooner Express. So maybe, you know, we'd like some dedicated lane or something like that for our Sooner Express to be able to go through, and that would just be a great improvement. So, you know, I think there's, you know, sometimes there's a rail bias, if you will, when I've done this in other places, and that's probably true here too, is that, you know, some people think it's sexier and cooler and whatever, but the reality is that BRT can be sexy too, if you will. So, you know, I think we really have to look at it from a technical. I am a transit geek. I'm a confessed transit geek. So, you know, you really do have to look at it from a technical side, and then beyond that, if people want to, you know, vote to pay for additional funding to do a rail, if it is more expensive, then you guys have something to think about. So. Okay. Anything else? Yes.
What was the biggest surprise out of all the community meetings?
You know, to me, I think the biggest surprise, which is horrible to say because I guess I just wasn't expecting much, but it was really, to me, amazing how insightful the people that we had at the tables were and how much they knew already about transit and what they were looking for. They've thought about this already. It's not like they walked in cold and we had to explain to them what transit was, which happens a lot. So I think that much like you all developing the regional transit dialogue so early on, and really thinking about things in the early stages in a really full and complete way, your community is doing the same thing. So, I mean, to me that was really, I think, really surprising.
Diane?
Yes.
I'd also point out that I was surprised that people focus so much on funding, and they recognize that funding and governance is a big part of this too. So it wasn't just, you know, I want to see a train or a bus out there. They realize we have to think this through, and we're going to have to get money from different places. So they're thinking about all the aspects.
I also liked the fact, which hasn't happened very often for me either, is that we had state representatives, we had state senators, we had a really, you know, high level of representation from that side of things, as well as from the community. So I was impressed with the people who were willing to take the time out of their busy schedules to come and work with us in the middle of July. So.
What was the tenor or the tone of the meetings? Was there anger? Was there resentment? Was there people afraid? Were people happy they were having the discussion? Are they inspired?
I think, and you know, you can temper me a little here at the end because I tend to get excited about this stuff, and I'm always positive about it. But and I know Caldwell was there as well, and several others, and you might want to chime in on this. But to me, I really think that people came prepared to think about it. They were excited to think about it and to try and, you know, they were a little like, I'm not sure how we're going to do it, but we want to talk about it. That was kind of the impression I got across all the corridors. I don't know if anybody wants to kind of give their sense. Yes.
I was at the South Stakeholders meeting,
Okay.
and very good group, very engaged, wanted to get into every aspect of it. And while there's a lot of supporters for bus in Norman, there's a lot of rail supporters too. And I know that people in Norman I've talked to understand that if you're going to talk about multimodal economic development, you have to base it off of your commuter rail, because that can't be moved. If you're going to have multimodal systems and put them in a location where you can access all pieces, you've got to look at your rail corridor to see how that fits, because that's going to have to be, the location's going to have to be close to that, because that's a proximity thing you can't change. But they were very, very engaged and got into the discussion and had a lot of good suggestions and built off of what we had already done. So it was positive from us.
I think that's kind of what we got in our East Corridor too, Tom, was certainly on the economic development side of what it's going to do to communities, the stakeholders especially. If they were going to look to invest, obviously the rail was the biggest, what's going to happen, because it isn't going to move. Once it's established, it's not going to move. And I think that was probably, certainly, after discussion talk as well as some of the stakeholders' questions were. But very positive.
Any more comments or questions? People that were there have a comment? Yes. I can't see whose arm that is.
I'm Jim Walkenbush. I'm a lifetime resident of Oklahoma City, and I'm here for the first time. But it's interesting what you folks have achieved so far. That's remarkable. And I think you certainly hit on the three primary corridor needs of Oklahoma City. And my question would be in two parts. One is there any future thinking about the Northwest Corridor, say out Classen, the Northwest Expressway, as well as from the airport, I-40 Meridian area in downtown Oklahoma City? That's the one part of the question. The second part is, we have the Santa Fe freight rail system all the way from Edmond, or Guthrie, through Oklahoma City, through Lower Norman. If it is a rail system that they use for those parts, have we looked into the possible cooperation with the Santa Fe people of using that corridor, or sharing it?
I'll let Diane answer the second part of that. The first part I'll answer with regards to Northwest Expressway and lines to the west.
Right.
Yes, we have looked at that. Actually, the 2005 Fixed Skyway Study, which you may or may not be familiar with, that the study that the City of Oklahoma City and Metro Transit did in 2005 looked at all corridors throughout the area. The study in which Diane is referring to is this Commuter Corridor Study. We picked three of what was deemed to be, yes, exactly. So we had to start somewhere. We recognize that there's needs throughout the region also, and we will continue to explore those. But in the short term, we're looking at these three corridors for this study. Yeah, but ultimately, when
That's certainly something that we can take up in the future.
Indeed, yes, and when and if we ever have a regional authority, we'll include technologies and service to the northwest and west portions of our region.
At the Santa Fe corridor.
Sure. So I want to make sure I'm answering your question correctly, but the Burlington Northern Santa Fe has existing rail lines that go from the Edmond through Oklahoma City and through Moore and then down into Norman. So we are looking at the right-of-way within that corridor.
Not necessarily their rail line, but.
It could be. We look, as we go through the study, we're going to look at both potentially sharing track as well as being adjacent to the track within existing right-of-way. And then UP goes kind of more east-west, if you will, and we'll be looking at that as well.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Are we on to item 3D? Do you need us to have a vote on this, the approval of it?
That would be wonderful.
Okay. How about a motion to approve the report of the committee?
So moved.
All right. Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. We'll be on to item 4, and we'll hear a little bit more about some potential funding sources for these ideas.
So before I ask everyone to break out their
And
checkbook,
this is Brian, how do you pronounce your last name?
Brian Piasek.
Brian Piazza.
I just want to refer everyone to the memo that we sent out with the listing of funding sources. If you haven't had a chance to read through that, I think it's important that everyone sort of understands kind of how we're trying to approach funding for the project. I think when we originally scoped this out, and Doug, you can weigh in on this, we really kind of were thinking about the three corridors as being sort of individual projects and coming up with a funding strategy sort of in each corridor. And when it really gets down to it, it makes more sense to take a much more, I called it global, but maybe I should have said regional approach to funding transit.
Hey, there are Canadians out there.
Sure. Yeah, we might, we pull in the right public-private partnership, maybe we can extend it. But I mean, it just makes a whole lot more sense, and we talked about this briefly at the last RTD meeting, that, you know, you're having this discussion on governance and what an RTA might look like in the Oklahoma City region, and it really just makes sense to partner that discussion with the funding discussion. You know, how you district it, you know, if you're gonna put it in municipalities, you're gonna do counties, you're gonna do some special type of district, that all weighs very heavily on how you are going to try to fund it, in terms of, you know, setting up revenue sources and that sort of thing. I think we won't lose sight, however, of what's happening on the corridor level, because there's a lot of funding mechanisms or funding sources that can occur in smaller geographic areas to beef up a station area, or you know, things like tax increment financing and things like that at the smaller district level that will be necessary in order to pull off, you know, whatever Diane and her team come up with in terms of the best transit investments in the corridor. So, everybody kind of needs to think about, we're looking at this in a much broader scope. I think it is important not to lose sight of the fact that you do have a transit system in Oklahoma City that would also need to be funded under that, probably, and other transit systems possibly even being funded under this regional RTA. You know, the one down in Norman, and Edmond, I guess, has one as well. So we want to be cognizant of the costs and the growth in those systems over time, so that we're bringing in a funding source or group of funding sources, more likely, that will be robust enough in order to cover that system and the development of that system over time. So with that being said, the real purpose of this meeting is to, I don't want it to be too boring. I really would like to hear from everyone on the committee and what your thoughts are on this, but we have the beginnings of a list of different funding sources that you all would like to investigate. My goal for today, between now and I guess 4:30 or so, is to take ones off the list that you know won't work. Add anything on the list if you've been in another part of the country or in another metropolitan area somewhere and you thought they had a fairly interesting idea on how they're funding transit. We're certainly willing to investigate that. And we'll just sort of move on from there. So the printout that you have is on a big, you got it on 8.5 by 11 in the colored sheets, and that's the part I would like for you to take with you. The big sheet is there. It's got some space in the margin. If you want to make notes or you think there's something that we should look at, I would love for you to jot it in the margin, as well as we can talk about it. But leave those sheets so that we can kind of have a little bit of record of what people's thoughts are on funding. Maybe there's something that you might think is a little more controversial or whatever. You can write it down, and we'll consider it. So that was sort of the reason for formatting it that way and giving you some space to jot notes to the team on that. I'd like to start off a little bit about how systems are funded. Are there any questions about sort of what we're trying to accomplish? Again, this will be very boring if people don't talk. So just weigh in when you can, I guess. Transit systems can be very hungry types of investments. There's two lists here, capital and operating, but a lot of people, they get a little worried about how to fund the capital side of a project. And, we could be talking B's here, $1 billion. Say we do $1 billion worth of investment in transit over the next 30 years. That's actually not a huge number in the overall scheme of things. It seems daunting. But that could buy a lot of commuter rail, could buy a lot of BRT, it could do a lot of things. But it's really important, and that would cover the first 5 bullets on the capital side. Say we spent $1 billion, so that's all your vehicles, that's all your support facilities, all the components that go into fare collection systems, all this stuff. But it's really important to understand that when you make these investments, you have to maintain them and you have to operate them. So that last bullet, it's the new buzzword in the transit industry is the state of good repair. But it's really talking about life cycles, and a rail car lasts anywhere from 20 to 30 years, but you need to refurbish it halfway through its life. Buses are 10 to 12 years. So you have to be cognizant, whenever you're trying to put one of these investments in there, you have to think about, you know, how is it gonna run in 20 years? And is it still gonna be a viable system? So that state of good repair, and you can incorporate, if we do bonding, if we do debt service on trying to put this $1 billion out on the street, that can be, on $1 billion, that can be anywhere from $18 to $35 million a year, just in capital improvements to maintain the system and debt service. And then another 15 to 25 million in operating costs. Okay, so that's a lot of money every year for perpetuity, until, you know, for as long as you're gonna operate the system. So, and that's really the mantra that comes down from the federal government. When you're gonna build one of these, we'll support you, but you have to show that you can keep it on the road and, or the rails and operate it. And they have funding mechanisms to help with that process. So I just, you know, that it's